Okay, welcome to the first video of our industrial power transmission course. Power transmission is a critical component of the mechatronics world, and this book does a great job of describing a lot of the aspects of basic maintenance of power transmission systems. And this book is the second edition. It's going to look a little bit different than the first edition, which hopefully you guys are not using, and it'll definitely be looking a little bit different than the third edition, which is the most recent edition, just came out last year. The page numbers will vary slightly, but the content is almost identical. We're going to skip the first few pages, and we're going to talk about the book as a whole. The book itself dives into kind of general knowledge at the beginning. So you've got safety, you've got tools, fasteners, print reading, and rigging. The first four are all extremely basic. Now, some of you guys, if you've had experience doing any kind of mechanical work in the past on your cars, basic carpentry, then the first four chapters will include a few nuggets of knowledge, but should hopefully be review. I'm going to dive in some of the lab sessions especially and talk about a lot of the specialized tools for the electrical and or the automation world. And we're going to talk about what they mean. So we're going to dive in person a little bit further. This isn't meant, originally we did not have a, what I call my shop math course, which is your measurement and calculation course. Where we hit on some of these things in measurement and calculations. We're going to hit them on a lot more detail in this course on the hand tools especially. But we're also going to touch on measurement devices as well. Once we dive into chapter 3, now we're talking in heavy industrial stuff that most people wouldn't have gotten into until they get into mechatronics, such as rigging. Unless you're working on a farm or working in a machine shop, you probably haven't done a lot of rigging and lifting of heavy objects. So this is really good stuff and critical. Section 2 gets into mechanical systems. A lot of us have used all these things. We've driven in automobiles with bearings and transmissions, but we don't really know, for the most part, so a couple of you guys may have some knowledge, we don't really know how they work. So we're going to dive in at the beginning on how these things work, what a bearing is, how it works, and then we're going to talk about how you get it working properly. This book covers a lot of stuff that we're not going to get into. It gets into electrical mechanical stuff, but we have other courses and other books that cover probably everything in section 3 and beyond. And so we're not really going to hit on these heavily, but this section, these books also have very useful information. It's worth keeping as a lookup. So as you take these other courses where you will use other books for this stuff, don't discount what's in here. You still want to keep this for some of the lookup sections. We're not going to be diving into anything in section 3 for the bulk of this course. So kind of, you don't have to worry about that. But let's begin with chapter 1. Chapter 1 kind of says, this is what you need basically to become a maintenance technician. And a typical day, it describes a typical day. Something breaks in your shop. You get some symptoms from your operator. And we're going to talk about operators a lot in this book. A good operator is an awesome thing. They can help you diagnose and solve mechanical and electrical problems and even software problems. Or they can really screw up your day by reporting kind of false symptoms, kind of making up their own stories, and or even causing the problems, and then making it seem like a mechanical issue. So a good operator is worth gold, and a very bad operator can ruin your week easily. So developing relationships with your operators is critical. Turn the bad operators into good operators. I'm not going to dive into that too much further. So let's dive into safety. Obviously, you can read through this. I'm not going to hit on it. We are going to talk about PPE, especially in the era of COVID-19. PPE is a topic that everyone should be talking about. This book hits on it pretty well and describes all the basic stuff. The book talks about procedure for proper lifting, and which is interesting. The book also talks about lockout and tagout, which I like to make sure everyone understands that the shortening for that is LOTO. You guys already should be getting that in your OSHA class, so you should be able to teach me more than I can even remember about me teaching the OSHA class last time about lockout, tagout. All right. Is this clear for you guys? Can you see this clearly? Well, you don't have to say anything if you don't want to, but it's refocusing itself here for me. So on page, I guess this is page 4 and 5 in the second edition, we get into workplace safety. And kind of the interesting thing about workplace safety is it's almost entirely behavior dependent. Either the behavior of the individual who might be doing something unsafe, or the behavior of the individual who might be setting up an unsafe condition by their action or their inaction for the next guy along. So it's interesting to me that horseplay is considered one of the most common unsafe acts. And if you wonder why I really come down on anybody doing horseplay in the classroom, that's because it is a big problem with workplace safety. And, you know, in many classrooms, horseplay, kind of goofing around, you know, bumping into your buddy and smacking him or whatever. I've had this in my classroom. It's sort of good, fun, jocular behavior, but don't do it. Don't do it in the classroom, and don't do it in the workplace. Horseplay is a major issue. Another key fact in this first area here is basically the work environment. In the old school manufacturing facilities, especially machine shops, you would always have that guy who would very, very carefully sweep and clean his area. At the end of every day, it was expected that you would make your area spotless. And the cleanliness of your area was an indication of how much pride you had in your area. It was an indication of how careful you were. That sort of work ethic has sort of slipped in a lot of workplaces where they have professional cleaning crews who come in at off shifts and do the cleaning. But I think it's really important. The cleaner and the more neat you have your workplace, the more safe it is. If you know how to reach out and find the right tool, if you don't have an oil drip or chips lying on the ground that you may step into and slip on, then you're going to be a much safer environment. So cleanliness is very, very important. PPE, you're going to learn a lot more about protective materials in your OSHA class. The book talks about PPE in a very definitive way, but the bottom line is you must follow the manufacturer's recommendation, and you must follow the recommendation of your workplace. If your workplace doesn't require PPE, then You might decide to wear it anyway, but you are relying on the manufacturer's recommended use of that PPE, not the workplace. For instance, this picture here, it shows a guy threw his hard hat on backwards because it's cool. And that particular hard hat is not designed to be worn backwards, but there are some hard hats that are designed to be worn backwards. Okay. So if everyone could make sure you've muted your mics, I would appreciate it. Jamie. Okay. So this is true for hearing protection, gloves, everything else. It's very, very important that you follow the recommendation of your workplace. And I don't think the book emphasizes that quite enough. The book talks about all this protective equipment in a sort of an equal way, which is good. It kind of gives you an overview, but you must follow your workplace recommendations. I want to hit on workplace appearance because some people aren't really, they get into workplace, they see that people are very casual, you know, wearing raggedy t-shirts and jeans with, you know, holes in it and things like that. And they get into that comfortable environment. I do not recommend that. I think if you appear professional at your workplace, then people will treat you professionally, and you don't want anything dangling. You don't want long hair that can get into a machine. If you have long hair, you need to keep it tied up and back if you are going to be working around any equipment. People have been killed by their hair being pulled into moving equipment. So you have to be aware of that. You have to be aware of jewelry. My dad worked as an electrician, and he never wore his wedding ring ever on the job because the wedding ring can get caught in mechanical systems, and the wedding ring, the gold, makes a great conductor if you're working in a box, and would allow a more easily electrical shock through the wedding ring. At least that was his theory. I'm not entirely sure it's true in every case. So jewelry, long hair, raggedy, dangling, you know, holes in your jeans can get caught and stuff. So look good and be safe. Pinch points, a big issue. I actually used to work on a lot of equipment with big rollers, so I'm very familiar with pinch points. And obviously there's two different kinds. There's the rotating and the pressing. So those are two very important things. The book talks about how to lift things properly, which hopefully you learned a long, long time ago. Bend your knees to lift. But I'm going to say this even more. Your workplace will have standards for how much weight you are allowed to lift based on their insurance and their OSHA regulations. And if they have, someone needs you to move a piece of equipment that is beyond, or you believe that its weight is beyond what you can safely lift, don't move it. Go get yourself a piece of equipment designed to lift and move that heavy device. So follow your workplace's recommendation. Securing areas is good stuff. Lowe's, for instance, is a great example of that. Every time they do a lift, you see them put out kind of barriers, visual barriers, so people don't walk in underneath a lift when they're putting a pallet of something up onto one of their racks. Electrical safety, I am not going to hit on that hard in this course because we have two other courses, both the OSHA as well as ELEC 153, where we hit on that, but still very, very important. We're going to have a couple of quiz things on it, like how many amps does it take to kill you? Death can occur with a current as low as 0.15 amps. A lockout, tagout, you will have that in OSHA, and you will have that in the ELEC 153. You should be well aware of the 6 steps in lockout, tagout. Very, very important. I'm not going to dive into it in this course because you've covered it in other courses more heavily. The book talks about the buddy system a few different times, like how you work when you work in different dangerous sites. You should work in pairs. And I think that's a great, in theory, kind of a thing. Some workplaces are going to have requirements for that, and you must follow that requirements. But most workplaces are going to discourage that because they don't want to have two people doing one person's job. So you're going to have to decide each for yourself. Unless your company has a specific policy, you're going to have to decide if a buddy system is required based on how dangerous the situation you're getting into. The rest of this chapter is basically just bullet items for different kind of things that you want to ask yourself in each one of these areas of safety. PPE, ladders, that sort of thing, switches, fuses, disconnects. So I'm going to call these good punch lists. They aren't really required, but by reading through these once, it will help spark some questions on your first mechanical job out there to make sure you're not the guy, the newbie, who runs into a dangerous situation. The book has a pretty good discussion of that stuff. The book is a little outdated on hazardous material handling, and I believe that is one of the areas that it's updated in version 3, the newest version that you guys are getting. The current hazardous material handling labeling is a little bit different than this, so read through your book. You should also have a repeat of this in your OSHA class, the NFPA 704 standard for labeling. Is this diamond thing. The one thing that this book does pretty well is lay out all the different groups that are responsible for setting the standards for safety, which I think is crazy that we have OSHA, we had NFPA, we have UL, we have NIOSH, we have all these different alphabet soup organizations for which you need, as a person in an environment like this, need to understand which one of them contain the safety requirements for you in case you ever need to look that up in the workplace. And don't be afraid to look things up. If you feel like you've been asked to do something that's unsafe, or you feel like you are going to be in a situation where you're not sure if what you're being asked is going to be regulations or even be against OSHA, then you absolutely, it's on you to look that up. Make sure that you personally are safe. MSDS they're just called safety data sheets now. They're no longer MSDSs, but they are basically the sheet that describes how dangerous that chemical is that you're handling. So this talks about what the content of an MSDS is, and then gives you examples of the PPE that might be required for different classifications of things in your MSDS, and then here is a sample MSDS. And I believe the new version has got this updated for the current terminology. Fire extinguisher use, also covered under OSHA. Very important to understand that. I urge you guys to keep fire extinguishers at home. I actually have fire extinguishers in the house, and I've done training sessions with my kids to make sure that all my kids know how to use a fire extinguisher. I will urge you guys all to buy 2 fire extinguishers and then practice with one. In other words, go start yourself a small fire and practice putting out that fire, not in your living room, hopefully outside, but practice putting out and using a fire extinguisher, and keep that fire extinguisher in your house. If you have kids that are sufficiently aged that they might be in a situation where they need to put out a fire, I think about age 10 or so or older, then you want to give them some training on how to put out fire as well. It's good stuff. Ladders and scaffolds, there's lots of good information here. I've known a lot of professionals who screw up the ladder thing. They don't set up ladders properly. There are specific OSHA requirements. You're going to hit on these in your OSHA class as well. The one thing I'll mention in all these ladder requirements is if you've been asked to use an unsafe ladder, don't use it. Stop, don't use it. And right now, to verify a ladder is safe, you must see a label on that ladder. If you've got a ladder that's been left outside, chances are the labels are all gone or they're faded out so you can't read any of them. If you can't read the label on your ladder, that ladder is no longer OSHA compliant. That ladder should be taken out of service. Now, I personally have ladders at my house that I will use that have faded labels on them, but I bought those ladders. I use those ladders on a regular basis. I can make my own personal decisions about whether I use that ladder or not. And my house and my personal use ladders are not covered under OSHA. So that doesn't count. But if you are in a workplace and you are asked to use a ladder that does not look safe or does not have a label that you can read, providing you very clear number of pounds that you can put on it, don't climb up on that ladder. Also, you can't, when you say your number of pounds, you can't lie about your own weight. You need to add in your weight plus any equipment you might be carrying up that ladder. And that's all I want to touch on in the first chapter. You should be able to answer these review questions. For instance, 2 things that cause accidents. Well, it's an unsafe condition that might be left by the previous guy, or it might be the unsafe act that you do yourself, or a combination of those 2 things. And what does that OSHA reg cover? Well, it's the safety data sheet or the material safety data sheet. All right,